out there and I see these tracks or I hear this sound, that's an indicator to me that I'm off the grid.
The thrill of having links out there is more vicarious in that we all know there's links out there, and that makes the system better, but we rarely get to see them. We don't really know what caused the extirpation of lynx in Colorado. Lynx are vulnerable to trapping, and their fur has always been very, very valuable. The boom of mining and the alteration in stream
Is it okay that we didn't get the normal voice? Yeah. Recording now. I could fake it, but I don't think that would help.
Amelia still working in the planning?
Yeah. Yep. Is my mic that loud? Yeah. It should be okay, but hot mic, hot mic. Great. I will call to order the September 14th, 2023 Louisville Planning Commission meeting with a roll call, please.
Commissioner Krantz.
Here.
Commissioner Troy.
Here.
Commissioner Baskett.
Here.
Commissioner Moline.
Here.
Commissioner Howe.
Here.
Commissioner Osterman.
Here.
Chair Bonice.
Here. Thank you. With that, I would entertain a motion to approve this evening's agenda.
So moved?
Second. Thank you. All in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none. Thank you. I would now open it up for public comment for items that are not on this evening's agenda. If there's anybody who would like to speak that is not on the agenda, please use the raise hand function if you're participating online, *9 if you're participating by phone, or welcome up if you're here. Seeing none, we'll move into our first item of new business. I will now open the public hearing on a request for a rezoning of 1301 Courtesy Road and Outlot 1. The purpose of the hearing is to receive evidence regarding the application materials and provide a public forum for all interested parties who wish to comment on this request before the Planning Commission. The procedure for the public hearing will be as follows. First, there'll be a presentation and testimony by city staff, followed by questions from the Planning Commission to staff. Next, we will have a presentation and testimony by the applicant, followed by questions from the Planning Commission to the applicant. After these two presentations, members of the public who have joined this meeting in person, by computer, or telephone may speak regarding the application. Anyone who would like to speak is asked to complete a speaker card, use the raise hand function if participating by computer, or *9 if calling in by telephone. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes per person. Pooling of comments is not permitted. The purpose of public comment is to receive public testimony and not a forum for debate or dialogue. Commenters are encouraged to raise pertinent issues and may ask questions for clarity. However, these questions will not be directly answered during the public comment period. The applicant and staff will then be allowed to make a closing statement. I will then close the public hearing, and no further testimony or other evidence will be received unless the commission decides to reopen the hearing. The Planning Commission will discuss the matter and may approve with conditions, deny, or continue to a future meeting. Public hearings are recorded for the public record. All testimony must be presented after stating your full name and address. Does anyone participating in this hearing object to the procedure I've described? Seeing no objections. Do we have notification?
Yes, all public notice requirements have been met.
And do any Planning Commission members have any disclosures for this first item? Seeing none. All right, thank you. Director Zucchero?
All right, well, good evening, Chair Brauneis, members of the commission. I'm Rob Zucchero, Community Development Director for the city. I'm going to be doing the staff presentation for this request. So this is a request to rezone about a 2.5 acre property that is on the west side of Highway 42. It's south of Griffith Street. Just to orient you, this is what you're probably familiar with as the Delo development. You've got Old Style Sausage here and Louisville Tire Center and the Coal Creek Collision Center here. Just off the photo here is South Street and the South Street underpass that leads into downtown as well. So that's the location of the property that is in for the request for the rezone. There's really two parts of the request. There's the formal rezoning that's being requested, which is to go from our commercial community mixed use to residential mixed use, and then also amending Exhibit A within the city's ordinance in Chapter 1714. So there is a land use exhibit, so all zoning within our mixed use district has to be consistent with this exhibit. So every time we do a rezoning, you also have to amend that section of the code in that exhibit. So here's the property. This is what the current land use exhibit looks like. This is the Delo development that's already gone in down here. And then this is the Little Italy neighborhood here. This is a lot of vacant land as well as some commercial properties up here that are currently developed. So the rezoning going from basically commercial to mixed-use residential, what we are going from is within the mixed-use district, even though it's called commercial mixed-use, it is intended to be only commercial within that zoning. I'll go over the background a little more, but basically within this district or the mixed-use overlay, the intent was everything that was bordering either South Boulder Road or Highway 42 was intended to be pretty much purely commercial, and then the mixed-use residential was supposed to be off of the highways. There have been a couple of rezonings that have happened since the institution of this zoning as well, and I'll get into all that history, but the proposal to go to mixed-use residential means that it would primarily be of residential use. The zoning code doesn't require a mix of uses because of the size of the property. It strongly encourages a mix of uses. So if this were to be approved, we would anticipate that there would be residential use primarily, but there could be office or retail or some type of institutional use as part of that mix. It allows up to 20 dwelling units per acre under the base zoning maximum. So a little bit of the history here. So I think if you're familiar with this property, hopefully you can see this. Here's South Boulder Road and Highway 42. The planning for this property began, 20 years ago, really, in anticipation of commuter rail coming through the city, as well as it was an old industrial area, and the intent was to revitalize it so that it becomes a mixed-use district that is walkable, more pedestrian-friendly, more multimodal, but also very much in support of the anticipated rail station. So there was a lot of planning that took place in the early 2000s, and that led to an urban renewal district. So there is an urban renewal overlay. We have the Louisville Revitalization Commission. They've actually helped fund a lot of the current DLO development that's taken place. In 2007, this mixed-use overlay district was created. Basically, the way it works is the properties were allowed to be maintained, all of the old industrial properties. However, they can also expand, but their expansion ability is limited. But if they do redevelop, there's a mandatory rezoning requirement. This property that's the subject of the hearing tonight has actually already rezoned under this code, but they rezoned to that commercial, mixed-use commercial district. In 2013, before the DLO development, there was basically a highway access plan. It's the Highway 42 gateway analysis. That's going to be relevant here a little later on, but there was a lot of planning of how access would take place into the redevelopment district. And there were a couple of lights planned at different areas and, to try to support the redevelopment. That's changed a little bit since those initial plans. Again, DLO, which includes some commercial and residential development, as well as DLO Plaza, where Moe's Bagels is right now. That was part of the original DLO development that took place around 2015, 2016. So again, this is all centered around this urban renewal area and trying to support a future rail station. So I just have a quote from the urban renewal plan here as well of what the city's trying to achieve. Of course, it's, with any urban renewal area, you're trying to remove blight. Within the area, it doesn't mean every property has blight, but there's general blight, and everybody qualifies within the urban renewal area for all of the tools, even if the property is not blighted itself. So we are trying to stimulate growth and investment in that area and have appropriate land uses to support redevelopment as well. I think there's probably some questions about passenger rail coming through, because that was the original intent of this plan. And as a lot of you know, fast tracks, the commitments and the taxes that everybody's been paying, they haven't been able to bring rail for various reasons through this Northwest corridor. But there are still ongoing efforts. As a city, we're still anticipating, we're still promoting rail service. We're actually in the middle of a study with RTD. It's called Peak Rail Service. So all of the communities in the Northwest Rail Corridor, we're studying feasibility. So instead of having full service where you have dual tracks and the trains are coming all day at regular intervals, it's kind of starter service where you'd have 3 commuter trains potentially going to Denver in the morning and 3 trains coming back in the evening. So there is an active study. That's also considering Front Range passenger rail. So if you've heard of this, this is a new CDOT rail district that is looking at more regional rail service. And this Northwest Rail Corridor is one of several corridors that they're considering, but it's included in a couple of kind of preferred corridors that are being considered right now for Front Range passenger rail. So I think the city is still continuing to look at this as a mixed-use, hopefully transit-supportive type development district. So the applicant has provided a concept plan of what this development could look like with the rezoning. So I want to point out that, the rezoning is only over this area here, but the applicant is looking at developing all of this area. So this was previously DLO Lofts, if you're familiar with that. There was actually a development proposal from this applicant recently just to develop this parcel. That was not ultimately approved by City Council. So now they're looking at kind of consolidating lots, seeing if they can get this rezoning, and then come in for a development proposal. So if this rezoning takes place, it does not mean this development will take place, just to be clear, but this is their vision right now of why they want the rezoning. So this is the commercial parcel, and they're hoping to do probably an apartment building with some mixed-use retail, and then townhome development on the west side here. where the Delo Lofts project was supposed to take place. So in support of their application, they have also provided a traffic analysis and a market analysis. So staff did talk to the applicant pretty extensively about city likes commercial development. There's a lot of fiscal reasons we like development, but if it's not market supported, maybe the city would consider something different because there could be benefits if there's a more market supported development type. So they did provide some market analysis for us to consider in addition to the traffic analysis. So on the traffic analysis side, basically what they looked at was if you took this area here and it remained commercial zone, if it remained just purely commercially zoned, and you got a strip center and maybe some pad sites, just like Delo Plaza to the south, you might be able to fit in 20 or 25,000 square feet of development. So what's the traffic volume from that type of development versus the apartments and the retail that would be mixed in with it? And so what we see on a daily average, according to that study, traffic would actually be reduced on a daily average. You see that during the AM peak, in and out, it's pretty neutral. So the ins are a little less, the outs are a little more, but just by a small amount. And then if you go into the PM peak hour, you would expect less traffic with that change in zoning. So we really didn't look at any transportation infrastructure that would be needed that we haven't already anticipated. The market analysis that they provided is really demonstrating kind of what we've observed in this area over the last 10 to 20 years, really, is that it appears to be a pretty weak market for purely highway-oriented, auto-oriented commercial development, which is what it's zoned for basically on the perimeter of the district. There is a much stronger market for residential development. Part of that is poor access probably, which I'll talk about a little bit more, poor vehicular access. So again, the purpose of this mixed-use district, it's to implement that revitalization area plan, transition from that industrial development to a more mixed-use walkable district, and again, provide some development that would enhance the future station. So as you know, development's gone in. We know it's not going to look exactly like these initial plans, but you can see there is the intent potentially to have a commuter rail station here within the district. So to the rezoning analysis itself. So anytime somebody's asking for a rezoning, there are 4 different policies that the city can consider, and it needs to meet one of those policies. So in staff's analysis, we feel like there's a good argument that it's meeting policy number 2. The area for which the rezoning is requested has changed or is changing to such a degree that it's in the public interest to encourage redevelopment of the area. So you would need the rezoning to encourage redevelopment. So staff's recommended findings are that there are weak market conditions for highway-oriented commercial, and there's a lack of adequate vehicular access to support highway-oriented commercial uses. When that land use exhibit was initially adopted, I think there was a sense that there could be a stronger market for that highway-oriented commercial, and we did work on some access plans to get better vehicular access, which we're finding is a little bit more limited than we expected just because of the location of other signals and issues trying to get new signals through the Department of Highways. So just a little bit more on staff's analysis on that criteria. So we do have that market analysis that the applicant has provided, and at least in our observation as a city, we are continuing to see what seems to be a pretty weak commercial market. The Delo Marketplace that has the Moe's Bagels and the Ziggy's Coffee, that took a long time to fill up. It is pretty full right now, and that was developed around 2015. 2016, I think, is when they started to occupy the property, so it's been a while. There's still 2 pad sites that are zoned and platted for development, and those haven't been occupied, so it's been almost 8 years. So that's just an indicator of potentially a pretty weak commercial market. And then So this is the original land use plan. This isn't the current one. It's been amended a little bit, but all of these kind of reddish areas are intended to be those auto-oriented, kind of highway-oriented commercial developments. This is where the Delo Plaza development is. So, you know, that could be a potential change in conditions since the original zoning and this original land use exhibit. And I've talked quite a bit about the lights and the access. So the city did, after a lot of effort, get a light at Short Place to try to implement this access plan. That light's been in for several years, and we still haven't been able to fill those pad sites at the Delo Plaza site, even with a light immediately adjacent to that commercial site. So what we hear very often from the development community is you're really going to struggle to get purely commercial development without better access. So with all rezonings, we do a fiscal analysis. We have a fiscal analysis tool here at the city that looks at the type of revenues that we would get with the development from increased taxes and development fees, and then how much does it cost to serve those new residents of the city. And so with a residential mixed-use development, you often see a net negative in the fiscal model because you provide a lot more services as a city to residents. You have libraries and rec centers and things like that that you provide services to. With the commercial development, you don't have as much demand for those services. So all of those factors go into this model. So we did two different scenarios. One was the current zoning. So we modeled the whole property, not just the rezoning property. So the current scenario would be about 45 apartment units in a 20,000 square foot retail center. With the proposed zoning, we use the applicant's concept plan. And we also do a high and a low. So we assume a more aggressive build out, higher values, and then a slower build out, lower values for the cost of construction and the value of the properties and income and those types of things. And what you end up getting is a net result. So this is in thousands, and this is this top one is 20 years. So for example, under the high scenario, under the current zoning, over 20 years, this model shows a net deficit to the city of $472,000 on an annual average. That's $24,000 per year. And then with the proposed zoning, because there's more residential, less commercial, those numbers go up. There's a lot of margin of error, I think, in this model, so I don't know exactly what it might be, but you know, I think in staff's review, this isn't an exceedingly high negative number in any of the scenarios, especially on an annual basis. We put some information in the staff report too, that we do look at the fiscal model, but there are other things that the city should look at when it comes to economic vitality, economic support that a development can bring. I think, you know, one of those things is that what's the potential of fostering redevelopment? How does that support all the businesses around it? So there are existing businesses like Delo Plaza. Would be very close to the South Street underpass downtown. So this could actually spur on new businesses and support existing businesses within Delo and downtown. So that's not necessarily captured within the fiscal analysis as well. The other thing is that we are continuing to see increased online sales tax. So when we first adopted this model, there's an assumption that brick and mortar commercial sales tax is where the city gets a lot of its revenue. We still get most of our revenue from brick and mortar sales tax, but over the last 10 years plus, we've seen a steady increase on basically out-of-city sales tax, which captures internet sales tax. So there was a Supreme Court decision a few years ago that kind of paved the way for local municipalities to collect more and more of that internet sales tax and have the legal right to collect that internet sales tax. So it's really gone up since that Supreme Court decision as well. So the fiscal analysis formulas have changed quite a bit as far as, you know, if you're building more residential, that actually replaces a lot of the brick and mortar sales tax that you might otherwise get. I will say we did adjust our model up a little bit, and we're still seeing a little, a slight negative result in that. So with that, staff is recommending approval of the rezoning and would be happy to answer any questions. The applicant team is here as well and has a presentation to make to the commission.
Thank you very much. Commissioner questions for staff. Commissioner Moline.
I have one, Director Zucchero. Let's see, I realize we're at the rezoning stage, but let's say this does get rezoned to the residential mixed use. Can you walk me through how our new affordable housing regulations would apply to a parcel like this?
Yes, so we have an inclusionary zoning ordinance, and as it's drafted currently, they would be required to provide 12% affordable housing. There's a couple options. So the base assumption is you build it within the development. So 12% of the units would have to be deed restricted affordable, and at least half of those would have to be 60% of area median income and below. And the other 50% of that 12% could be up to 80% of area median income. So it's basically 12%. They can ask for cash in lieu. A lot of potential residential developers that we're talking to are wanting to do cash in lieu. In that case, we would collect, funds that we think would be of an equivalent of that 12% to subsidize 12% equivalent housing that we could use elsewhere.
Thank you very much.
Additional questions for staff at this time? Commissioner Howe.
And maybe this is a better question for the developer, but do you believe that this will be a concurrent development of retail and commercial?
Yeah, I will defer to the applicant on their intent on that. And again, we don't have a PUD application yet, but yeah.
Commissioner Krantz.
Yeah, I have a question on the difficulties with the write-in and write-out. I'm wondering if you could explain the difference in why why wouldn't the same difficulties apply to residential as they would to commercial? I mean, a commercial, you understand what I'm asking?
So I think the difference is,
Wouldn't
I think what we're trying to say is that for someone to choose to locate their business at this location, we think there's much less demand. When a business looks at this property and they see the limited access where you only have write-in, write-out, and you don't have full movement access, a business is much less likely to come to this location. A resident has much more flexibility. They're not trying to capture highway traffic that are, going to or from somewhere. Somebody coming in to get their bagel or their cup of coffee, or so a resident doesn't have that issue. So somebody might choose to live here and not be as concerned about the limited access. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Additional questions of staff at this time? I'm curious as to your thoughts on what is best for Main Street, for businesses there, and then even going bigger, how does that relate to commercial uses of McCaslin Corridor and, with relation to this question?
Yeah, I think in staff's analysis, we do think this could help economically support Main Street. You would bring more rooftops, more residents who are going to be living there. They're going to be much, much more likely to go to Main Street and, frequent the retail shops, the restaurants, and all the other services on Main Street. So I think there's a very clear, direct link to this potentially supporting Main Street and Main Street businesses. I think on McCaslin, it's much less direct potentially on McCaslin. I'm not sure of any direct link that I can think of. Other than McCaslin's probably still within this market shed And, you know, more residents that we have within the Market Shed, the more likely they would be to go to McCaslin and utilize services there as well.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Seeing none at this time? Oh, yeah, okay. Commissioner Basket?
Rob, can you just maybe go back to a slide and show the points of access to the site?
I think this is probably the best place to see the points of access. So there is potentially, so there's Griffith Street would be the primary access that exists now. And then coming down Cannon. And then there's likely going to be a right-in, right-out access, which would be a private driveway at this location. So if you go down to the concept plan, it's a little bit off the image here, but we're anticipating a private access at this location, and then Griffith Street up here. And then it looks like you could potentially, through this concept plan, not even go all the way to Caledonia, and then come, Caledonia, you could come in this private driveway here as well.
Great. Well, that goes to Commissioner
Cannon
Kranz's
Street,
question about why is the access different for commercial versus residential? It's a different type of access using the minor streets rather than Highway 42. Thank you.
Commissioner Krantz?
So just to follow up on that, it would not be, like, I'm thinking of like how Christopher Plaza, you have, it's like you can make a left into Christopher Plaza and then you kind of have a little frontage area. Would this, if it was to be commercial, would that kind of a situation be feasible where you come in on Griffith Street and take a private driveway or a driveway owned by the retail businesses around the back to those retail businesses? Or I'm understanding,
So I mean,
same way as the residential?
yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of ways to provide access to this property. It just wouldn't be a signalized full movement access is what we wouldn't anticipate. Could a commercial development like Christopher Plaza succeed here? Potentially. I think, you know, within the market forces that exist as well. So if you pair that with the market analysis, which shows an oversaturation of commercial development, maybe a little less office, which Christopher Plaza has a lot of office, that's a little bit different. I think it's a matter of if we want to try to incentivize redevelopment because it is part of the urban renewal area. You know, we've been trying as a city for, you know, since 2007 timeframe to facilitate redevelopment of this property commercially, and it hasn't happened. Just anecdotally, that might be a sign that commercial is a limiting factor.
From a planning perspective, the thought of having a 3-story apartment building on Highway 42, right, initially, some of this commercial thought was they would step back and step up to some of the higher density, higher height residential areas within the neighborhood itself. What are your thoughts on how that would impact the area?
Yeah, so I actually think it might not be quite as intuitive, but you know, we might want to focus. So oftentimes you'll have the smaller scale. There's a few reasons why you might want to have smaller scale buildings. Some of it might be purely aesthetic. Sometimes it's having a good view corridor to commercial developments, so you're not blocking the view corridor. But having taller buildings along the busier roads and trying to orient the development inward could actually buffer the highway traffic from the pedestrian activity within the development and having more friendly pedestrian streets and internal areas for the residents. So I think, you know, we don't have any strictly 3-story right up on the highway, so it would look a little different, but it's not like it's 4 or 5-story either, and we do have 3-story apartments just off the highway. So I think there's a little bit of subjectiveness to a preference from a character standpoint as well.
Thank you. Additional questions? Please, Commissioner Choi.
Director Zuccaro, so on this image, this is a good one. I know that the Delo lofts exceeded the units per acre, right, when they were originally proposed. Knowing that a zoning adjustment is not a PUD and there's no guarantee of any of this happening, the area that we're just talking about right now for the zoning adjustment, was there a calculation based on the concept of the units per acre just for that location?
Yeah, so we did look at that. We looked at the whole project, not just the rezoning area, and we did a density calculation. This is within the maximum density allowed under zoning under this concept. But we looked at the whole area in gross.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I don't know that we did a calculation of just the rezoning parcel and those 72 apartments. We can do that calculation pretty quickly for you here in this hearing if you would like to know.
It would be a good piece of data to have.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yep. Hey, Ellie, we'll do it when the applicant's making the
Additional
presentation.
questions?
Yeah.
Being none, I'd like to invite the applicant up, beginning with your name and city of residence.
Evening, commissioners. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Ellie, for your presentation. We've been working with Rob and now Ellie for, I guess, the better part of a year. I'm going to clear something up really quick just to start with. We were not the previous applicant on Delo West. We purchased these properties over the last year and have been working with the community to come up with a concept that we think fits for this site over the last year, and that includes city staff and local neighborhood and local business owners as well. My name is Hunter Floyd. I'm an architect and developer with Live Forward. I am excited to be here. Really, like, this is probably our favorite project of any project we have going right now. Louisville is an incredible community. I unfortunately don't live here. I wish I did get to call it home, but it's a really amazing community that you have here with a great Main Street, and we think a really cool area in Delo that can support Main Street and add kind of walkability as sort of a second piece to the core there. We've had the opportunity to work with staff and the local neighborhood, and everybody has been really generous with their time and feedback, and I think that's really indicative of a strong community and the strong community that you have here in Louisville. And we're really just looking to enhance it and do what we think is right, and frankly what the neighborhood thinks is right for this site as well. Go to the, oh, I'm not even showing this. How do I show this, Rob? Oh, it's on that side. Okay, there we go. So a little bit about us, Live Forward Development. We are a real estate developer primarily focused on boutique multifamily and mixed-use communities. We have, I think, 2 architects and 3 general contractors in the mix. So we're really a bunch that thinks a lot about design, planning, and craftsmanship, because we have builders on our team in the mix there. I'm going to show you a few projects that we've completed that we've worked on as a team, and just kind of tell you a little bit about us. We build high-impact, low-intensity housing projects on infill sites primarily. That is really kind of our bread and butter. This site is completely up that alley, and that is very neighborhood intensive. We know there's a lot of people that care a lot about this site. It's something that has taken us already a year to get to this point, and something that we realize is going to take further considerable effort beyond just this rezoning as we get into, although we're showing a concept plan, as we really get into kind of what we want to do with the site and the PUD submittal thereafter. A couple of these projects, these are townhouse projects for the most part, and an apartment project that you can see. A few more in the mix there of kind of varying scales. Sustainability is really important to us, and that's not just environmental sustainability, that's sustainability in terms of kind of mental health, emotional health, fiscal sustainability, and social sustainability within the communities that we work in. And I want to add this slide in here just to give you, this is something that's certainly really important to me and a number of our backgrounds, is we've worked on a lot of public projects at larger scales, both in the private sector with kind of land use, sort of land planning, and master plan communities and big retail centers and things like that as an architect and as planners and other roles, as well as larger kind of state projects or even airports. I have a kind of a long history of designing airports for about a third part of my career. So we really think not just about the immediate sites that we're working on. We like to really think about the overall impact in the community and engaging the people in that community, number one, but also thinking about, how it can support places like Main Street and not just, the immediate site that we're working on. Wanted to give you all a little bit of history as to, what we've done to date. And I'll show you some of the work that was completed out of that kind of led us to this. We've had, as I mentioned, we've really been working on this for about a year. And so, we were paying attention to the previous developer's proposal and a lot of the feedback that came out of that proposal on the Delo West site, that is. And because of that, immediately we reached out to local neighborhood groups, the Delo West townhomes, local business owners in the area, and really just kind of started building a bridge there with them, first and foremost to hear their thoughts and their feedback. We've also kind of given presentations to the Downtown Business Association, the LRC, other local business owners, and of course we've been working with Rob and Ellie and staff at the city for quite some time now. I will mention too, and I don't know if Rob gets into this or if you guys have access, but we have a number of letters of support for the rezoning from the DBA, for instance, from the local neighborhood, from other local business owners that we've received over the last 3 or 4 months. So the first thing we did was we kind of had a visioning session with one of the neighborhood groups, and we sat down with them with really nothing other than questions and a map and maybe the previous development. It was relatively fresh in their mind, and we got kind of some concerns and some requests out of them to start with, and this is what came out of that. So lack of green space, dog use and Delo Park, high density along Cannon specifically. A lot of people talked about retail. Rob touched on this quite a bit. Retail and commercial viability on that particular site. They were very concerned that we would end up building something that stood vacant or also could compete with some of the businesses on Main Street or other local businesses in the area. Traffic and safety, of course, is always a concern. And then connectivity, which you kind of saw, and Rob touched on the idea of perhaps us being able to create a new street that kind of reconnects the overall city grid in that area, which we're calling Mike Dvorsky calls it Caledonia, so we're calling it Caledonia, and it is really the extension of Caledonia, which kind of dead ends at the tracks on the west side of the railroad tracks. Some of the other things that were requested were affordable housing, obviously a big topic in every city in the United States really today. Amenities for residents, outdoor space for dogs, a lot of talk about picking up after people's dogs and making sure that there's areas for us for the residents to have their own space rather than using the other neighbors' front yards or parks or whatever it may be. And then a more compatible use to the site, which is currently kind of light industrial. There's a steel yard there. There's the remnants of what used to be an explosive testing facility on the site. So currently you could argue that it is blighted or certainly doesn't fit the rest of the character in the neighborhood. And then we did kind of a goal survey. So we sent them out this survey, and we got some feedback out of a number of different aspirational pieces and goals for the project. And number one thing was sustainability. Two was local sense of place and walkability. And then connected community and street connectivity was kind of the third. Those are all things that we certainly believe in, that we believe that we can achieve here given the right use on the what we call the boom site, which is the site that we're talking about tonight. This is the last slide. We kept this pretty short and sweet, and we're really appreciative of Rob and Ellie's work, and thought they did a really good job sort of describing the case here. But our summary is, look, it's consistent with the city's vision. From the get-go, the Highway 42 framework plan, this area was always conceptualized as a residential mixed-use site with predominantly residential use. That language is in the Highway 42 framework plan, and you can see it in the original city planning documents. It makes sense. Because of the access and in the way that the site has developed. It's neighborhood supported. We have a lot of support in the neighborhood that we've developed over the last year. It provides attainable and affordable housing once we get to that point on the site that I think it's important to note not only supports Main Street in terms of new clientele, but also supports Main Street with places in Louisville that they could actually afford to live in. You have an $850,000 median income home price in Louisville, and so very few people that work on Main Street can afford, I can't afford that house, so very few people can afford to buy that house that live and work in Louisville. Correct use for site access, Rob touched on that quite a bit as well, and neighborhood connectivity. The Highway 42 the Highway 42 vision has a median designed in front of this site, so we'll have right-in, right-out access. And I'll touch on your questions about the difference between retail access and residential access here in a minute. But and then neighborhood connectivity, giving another kind of outlet point for Cannon Street with the use of Caledonia that gets traffic out to Highway 42 instead of just having Griffith Street and Short Street kind of as the 2 points to get to Highway 42. Supportive of local business, and then increased walkability for the community's core. I think that's the overall intent of this neighborhood has been to be a walkable neighborhood from the get-go, and providing more residents that can walk to Main Street, can walk to the other retail places here, especially with people working less and less at the office these days. A lot of people, may not even need a car in this location, or one can hope that you would have a number of residents that don't have a car and simply just walk to Main Street and reduce their carbon footprint dramatically. That is kind of all we have. There's a few questions that you already brought up that I wanted to touch on, and just kind of thank you again for your time first and foremost. And we certainly look forward to working with you all, as we know we've got a fair amount more work to do, and have a few more discussions with you as we get into the PUD, hopefully beyond this meeting as well. So let me start with the access question. Something I was thinking about as you were asking that is, Rob, I think, hit it primarily, as a retailer or as a commercial business owner, you're driving people you want people to drive into your location, and you have to demand that drive, right? If you live there, you're not necessarily thinking about, okay, you're already there. For instance, would you turn down a house on a cul-de-sac? Probably not, right? It's probably in fact, a benefit to some extent. You're already there, you're only leaving or coming back. You don't have to demand people into that location. Tenants generally are not, or residents generally are not looking at we don't have a traffic signal immediately at the site, right? Doesn't generally drive demand. You can look at Delo Apartments down the street, which is tucked one block back from Highway 42. They've been about 97 or 98% occupied since they were built. I don't know if that answers it. There's a ton of research that you could get into with that question, but and then I think you had a question about sort of concurrency, Commissioner Howe. We can't fully answer that right now as we're just in the zoning stage and we're just talking about this, but it is our intent to build it all collectively. We've got a pretty strong relationship with a restaurant group out of Denver that's really excited about this site, and so we're talking about potential concepts with them that could be an additional amenity in a small scale kind of retail fashion for the site. I think there was another one in the mix, but I've forgotten it at this point. So I'll open it up to questions.
Thank you very much. Questions? Commissioner Choi.
Thanks for the presentation. It's good to see some of the work you've done. You've delivered over 1,000 units. You're working on delivering almost 600 more right now. Can you speak to what your target price point is for the affordable units that are in that mix of 1,600?
Elsewhere or here?
Just generally, I mean, in terms of, you know, the nature of what you guys deliver.
Denver has a really similar ordinance in terms of inclusive housing. So the projects in Denver that are rental projects are generally about 12%. For instance, one of the images up there is about 100 and similar scale, 140 units, kind of what we would consider a boutique scale for multifamily. And we'll have 12% affordable in that mix.
Thank you. That wasn't quite my question. And
Sorry.
Tell me if I'm asking too many trade secrets here, but I was looking for where you deliver in terms of a price point, even like on a dollar per square foot basis for units that you turn over that would be deemed affordable.
Very market dependent and county dependent on what the AMI is. I don't have that immediately in front of me to tell you what the number would be in Louisville, but certainly we could get that to you, and that would definitely be a part of the conversation as we go forward and get into the PUD planning process and started looking at unit mixes and unit counts and, you know, really get into that process.
Thank you.
Sorry, I couldn't answer fully, but.
It's all right. Out of left field.
Questions? Commissioner Osterman.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Just given the proposed mix would be townhomes and apartments, I just want to confirm, does that mean that there would be a mix of both owner-occupied and rental units, assuming that the apartments would be rentals, but if you could just confirm.
We're, at this point, we're intending it all to be rental. We think that there's a strong demand for people that can't afford a house but still want a little bit of a yard and want to feel kind of more in a single family or a townhouse mode in lieu of a stacked apartment, right? And the reason why we did that, and this was another question I think about kind of density and scaling back of density between Highway 42 and Cannon Street. The previous proposal and the approved or previously approved PUD for the western half of the site had 3-story apartments along Cannon Street, and the Delo townhouse community was very concerned about that, primarily because of traffic, and there wasn't the ability to provide access to on Caledonia to Highway 42, just looking at that singular site. But we responded to that and said, okay, well, let's bring the scale back to where their scale is, essentially. 2 stories, they have 3 stories in the townhomes. We'll be 2 mostly, maybe with a couple 3 stories in the mix. And then push, you know, the more typical, which would be lower cost too, apartments along Highway 42.
Additional question, Commissioner Howe?
Hi, thanks, Hunter. So I just want to go over some numbers with you. So you have 4.3 acres, and the guidelines state that you guys have 20 units per acre. That would allow 109. That would allow 88 units, and you guys are proposing 109. So I'm assuming you guys are going to, and I think it states in there that you guys will be looking for a waiver to extend that to your 109.
Rob can probably answer this better than me. But, yeah.
Right, so within this zoning district, your density calculation actually allows you to include to the center line of adjoining public streets. So when you take that extra area there within that 20 DUs per acre, gross for the whole development, just the rezoning parcel, if you took that in isolation and had the 74 apartments, that would be about 25 dwelling units per acre.
So I guess just to clarify that, so you're saying that there's more than 4.39 acres?
When you do the density calculation, yes, it's 5.36 is what we're estimating, just a rough estimate.
That would put you right over 20 units per acre.
So at this point, we're not asking for anything in that regard. We're just asking for use on the zoning side. So we wouldn't be able to, until we get into a PUD, and then maybe we could have an affordable housing versus density discussion, something like that, right? But at this point, it would be 20 units, right? We would have to stay underneath that if we got the zoning change.
I guess that was the ultimate question is, do you foresee wanting a waiver for additional units beyond, I mean, I know that's hard to answer because I know you're right at 20 right now, so you'd be compliant.
We've had conversations with the neighborhood. The neighborhood is fine with us kind of pushing somewhere closer to 25 units an acre along Highway 42. You know, right now, we're, again, not in that discussion. I think those are things that we'll talk about as we get into the next stage, right? And I think there definitely is a big conversation about how much affordable housing, how many units do you get, even if it's just 12%, right? How many units do you get in affordable housing if you push up the density a little bit and push up a few more units?
And maybe if I could just ask another one, just to build on Commissioner Choi's question. In the past with your other projects, have you ever done the fee in lieu rather than the affordable units?
Yeah, no.
Right on, thank you.
Sure.
Actually, if we can ask you up to the microphone with name and city of residence, please.
I'm Scott Kilkenny, and I live in Denver. One of the projects that we did that I think may speak to it, it's not what we're proposing here, but just shows what our kind of perspective is. And that is we built a 43-unit condo project down in Phoenix, and our whole goal was to target the demographic of a full-time hourly employee working for a Starbucks-like kind of job. So a condo there was $179,000 was our coming out of the ground price.
Thank you. And did that business model prove successful for you?
It did. We were closing on those units in 2020, so it's 3 years ago. Right kind of at the beginning of COVID. Sure. But all 43 sold very quickly.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Commissioner Krantz?
Yeah, it sounds like you are interested in actually building the affordable units rather than asking for the fee in lieu. Would you be comfortable with that being a condition of the rezoning?
I think it is a condition, that we would have to build them.
Rather than requesting the fee in lieu?
Yeah.
Director Zucchero, can you speak, I don't know that logistically.
Yeah, I would just, you typically can't condition rezonings on something like that. I would say that our inclusionary ordinance requires that you build it on site, and they basically have to request a waiver to not build it on site, and there's criteria for that. So we lean heavily towards having somebody build it on site, and then it's up to council if they would be willing to accept the fee. But we've actually had some discussions about this with the city attorney and putting conditions on rezonings, and we can't really do that.
I rescind my question.
Additional questions? Seeing none at this time, we'll open up for public comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And for anybody who would like to comment, if you've filled out the speaker card, I'm guessing. We'll check in with people online to see if there's anybody, no hands up yet there. Okay, great. We see one now. All right. Yes, so, and all the public comments were included in the pack. We don't have any addendums that we need to enter. Oh, no, we do, yes.
There's one comment that came in this afternoon.
Okay, right, if we can enter that into the record as we move into public comment, a motion to enter one comment from Mike Dvorsky into the record.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, thank you. Please limit yourself to 3 minutes. No aggregating of time. Begin with your name and city of residence, please. Who do we have speaker cards for at this time?
First, we have Jean Morgan,
And then on deck.
Cindy Bodell.
Hi, I'm Jean Morgan, 1131 Spruce Street. I live down in Miners Field. I would ask your support as individuals or as a committee that we really need a light, a traffic light at Griffith and Highway 42. In our neighborhood on that side of the tracks, we have only 3 ways to get out. We can make a right turn on South Street. There's a light on Short, thank goodness. But we also, especially with this new development and more traffic there, we need one on Griffith. And I know it's been asked for before, so I'm going to ask you as a commission or as individuals to help us get a way out of our neighborhood. We'll have Miners Field, we've got Delo, the new development, Little Italy, and then the development that's going to happen north of Little Italy one of these days to get out of our neighborhood without going over to Main Street, and especially when the school kids are there, it's dangerous, and then to get up to South Boulder Road to go north, it's very busy. So whatever you could do to help us get a light down on Griffith, I'm sure that all of us who live over on that side of the tracks would appreciate it. So thank you very much for your help on that, if you can do it.
Thank you very much.
And next, we have Sherry Summer.
After, yes, no, you're up.
Hi, I'm Cindy Bedell with my exceptionally large computer I bought during the shortage in the pandemic. So anyway, I just wanted to point out a couple things from tonight's packet.
I'll just confirm for you, you are a Louisville resident.
Yes, Cindy Bedell, Louisville, Colorado. Yep. So just a couple things from tonight's packet. So on page 18, it says section 17.44.05A of the municipal code outlines the city's policy for rezoning. This rezoning supports, and then the applicant is saying the rezoning is supported. But I have a question about that. Number 1 says the land to be rezoned was zoned in error. So I'm not sure that's accurate. So that's a question I have. And my second comment would be on page 10, which talks a little bit about the physical analysis of residential versus commercial. So I just need a second to scroll up. So on page 10, the packet says any mixed-use development that includes residential development often results in a negative fund balance with the city's current modeling tool. This is because residential development results in more expenditures to provide city services to the residents of the development when compared to commercial development. The proposed zoning scenario has a slightly larger deficit considering there is more residential and less commercial development in that scenario. So in the next paragraph, it states the physical model predicts a slight negative net balance from this rezoning. So I just asked you to consider these 2 things that are in the agenda tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then after Sherry, we'll have the person who's online. Great. Oh, a couple people online.
Good evening, Sherry Summer, Louisville. Oh, there you go. I would ask that you recommend denial of this proposal. I believe that there are many great aspirational things about it, but they are it's aspirational because this is not the PUD phase. There are many real problems that this development would present, and not enough clarity about how residents' wishes would be responded to. The planning department is citing policy number 2 to encourage development if it's in the public interest. Given what I've heard from residents in the area who spoke at the Delo West proposal, they were very, very concerned about traffic. This will only add more traffic. We need to consider those residents. Even though they're not here tonight, we've already heard them spoken about that. And I especially find it concerning that CDOT is not recommending denial. I'm also concerned that our planning department has not produced a traffic study. What I see coming is, along with Coal Creek Station, very many cars going through Little Italy, going down Griffith Street. There's a school there. There's already too much traffic in tight spaces. If we're allowing the maximum density on 5 acres when it's actually like physically a little over 4, there will not be more green spaces that we're not, I mean, it will be very difficult. I know some people might think Delo is not thriving. When I look at it, I think it's moving forward. I think that commercial area provides walkability to the residents who are already there. And they probably really like going to a place like a coffee shop near their homes. If this is purely residential, no one will be walking to anything there. It will only be the residents of those apartments. I'm also really concerned that this will be an all rental development because people will not have a stake in it. They will not be able to stay in Louisville. They might be able to pay a lot of rent, but they're not going to be able to buy in. And we don't have any idea either about how the market rate of the rentals will be. 10% affordable is not very much when you think about how many more additional units are being added. The point about the traffic, yes, you have to, if you live in a place, you have to get there. So, but the traffic will be bad and it will be hard to access. You know, a business, people may elect not to go there, but we know that this is setting up a problem. And I really liked what Commissioner Howe said previously about traffic. We need to see forward to prevent problems, not see them coming, and then allow that to happen. I really would request that you think about this very carefully. Thank you.
Thank you. Then online.
First, we have Joshua Cooperman, and then we have Mike Kransdorf.
Mr. Cooperman, you should have a live mic now. You may need to unmute yourself.
With the computer.
Chair Brown, I said something with the computer speakers we have to figure out.
Okay. Actually, we have a technical issue here that we're working on. If you'd like, we could take a break. Yeah, should we do that? We will take a 7.5-minute break, reconvene at 1:45.
Hi, Rob. Can you hear me? Sure. Got it.
Great, if we can welcome everybody back. Thank you, Mr. Cooperman. We'll start the recording.
Recording in progress.
There we go. That sounds like it'll work a little better this time. Thank you, Mr. Cooperman. Go ahead and your thoughts, please.
Hi, this is Josh Cooperman. I live in Louisville. I am strongly in support of rezoning this property to mixed-use residential. First of all, I think this is a great spot for redevelopment, especially since it's redevelopment and it's not development of greenfields. Secondly, I think this is a great location for more housing in Louisville. The people who will eventually live there can patronize surrounding businesses on South Boulder Road, in downtown, in the Delaware region, and more widely in Louisville, just by walking or biking, or perhaps by taking a bus, which comes by on Main Street. Moreover, those residents can potentially walk or bike to work, again, in those same locations. And I think those extra residents will help to support our businesses in the area. I know that many of the businesses downtown would like to see more foot traffic, and I think that this, when this eventually becomes a residential development, that will provide some of that foot traffic, which will better support our businesses in those areas. So I am very much in favor of this rezoning because I like the potential of the project as being more sustainable. The higher density is also more sustainable, and the higher density means that there's a lower infrastructure cost for the city per unit. Lastly, but not leastly, I am also very much looking forward to this project because it will very likely provide some more affordable housing in town, which we desperately need. And I would like to say that I am willing, and I hope that our community is willing, to make some sacrifices, for instance, a little bit more traffic, to make progress on affordable housing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Kransdorf, we will unmute you here. Go ahead.
Hello, thank you. Mike Kransdorf, I'm a Boulder resident, and my family owns Pine Street Plaza just down the street on Highway 42. I think this project would be a benefit to an area which does appear to be better served by residential over retail, especially affordable residential. For reference, there was a very large commercial site that was required to be built on Highway 42 in front of Steel Ranch that never materialized and is now also going to be primarily residential. Seeing the positive feedback from local neighbors via the emails is a welcome change from the previous proposal, and I think that says a lot about the applicant and the project. So I encourage the commission to approve the zoning change. I think it's a good thing. Finally, I assume you know we can't see anything other than the city logo online. Maybe you can fix that for the next one. I don't know. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, and we'll have to work on the video not going up, apparently. Thank you. All right, with that then, we'll open it up to an applicant response and closing statement. If you want to address any of the issues, questions, concerns, and a closing statement.
Thank you, everybody, again, and thanks for those that spoke up in support and also those that spoke up with their concerns as well. And I think I want to maybe just respond to some of the comments earlier about kind of the neighborhood and their thoughts about this development. And I think you'll see at the back of the packet at least 3 or 4 letters of support from immediate neighbors in the neighborhood at the Delo Townhomes community, of which this will be directly across the street, as well as our neighbor to the south, Mr. Dvorsky, and the neighbor further to the south there, and Tebow Properties, which owns the retail center. So I think we have done our best and are willing to, as we go through this process, continue to engage the neighborhood, engage the community, and talk to as many people, frankly, that will listen to us, or really will end up listening to them. So I think, as we stated before, I think we've shown that we've got a lot of support in the immediate neighborhood here. Are there any other kind of questions that you think I should respond to at this point?
Maybe if you want to address traffic a little bit.
Yeah, so we were talking to Gene earlier about that. I think there's definitely going to be, first and foremost, at this point in time, we're really talking about residential versus commercial, right, in terms of the use. And traffic studies will show time and time again that commercial use is more intensive than residential use. So by rezoning to residential use will ultimately be, showing less traffic at any traffic study would show. I think there's a lot of cooperation that's going to have to happen between us and the city and frankly CDOT and what's happening with the Highway 42 vision, which we've had some preliminary calls with CDOT at this point about that. We do believe, and I think the neighborhood stance as well was pretty strong in this, that adding that additional outlet from Cannon Street to Highway 42 and that new street in the area will certainly at least help the situation, which is currently a problem at the Cannon, specifically the Cannon and Griffith intersection was something that was brought up quite a bit. So I think, we've got a lot of collaboration to do as we go forward there, but there's some solutions that we brought to the table that will hopefully alleviate those concerns and in the end provide more people walking than driving.
Thank you. Final opportunity for us to raise any additional questions for the applicant. Have any? No. Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thanks again for your time.
Welcome a staff response and closing statement.
Staff has nothing else. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional questions for staff? Seeing none. Thank you. I will now close the public hearing, and planning commissioners will deliberate on the evidence presented. During deliberations, no further public comment or other testimony or evidence will be received. Who would like to begin? Commissioner Moline.
Okay.
All right, excellent, thank you.
You bet. Yeah, I'm going to be, I'll just lead with the headline here. I'm going to be in support of this, and I'll talk about that here in a little bit. I really agree with the staff assessment about just at the foundational element of this. In terms of the rezoning, I do think it is in the public's interest to see this property rezoned. And I say that as a member of the Planning Commission who has seen some of the evolution of this property. And I think in the middle 2000 teens, we did envision that maybe there was still an opportunity for some commercial on State Highway 42. And so I think that hope that we would be able to see that kind of a development in some of our corridors that the comprehensive plan spoke about, that led to some of the zoning that was applied on this site. And I think at this point, I appreciate the staff analysis. I appreciate the analysis that the applicant brought forward as well. And I just don't think we're going to be able to see purely commercial development or even mixed use, commercial development on this site. And so I am in support of seeing this rezoned to the residential zoning that we've spoken about. And I believe that it's important to get additional residential zoning in our community because we know that housing is needed. And so we know the housing is needed. I think for me, the traffic conditions, this again, as compared to what could be developed there, the commercial development, as was displayed in the staff report, I think that's a wash. We're not going to see any increase in traffic on this site. Yes, we are going to have this ultimately will result in some increased financial cost to the city because it is residential development. But I concur with some of the comments that we've heard from the public this evening that this is one of the places where I think our community wants to see us spend some public cost as we try and attempt to get some additional housing here in our community. So it's for those sorts of reasons that I'm going to be supportive of this. And then I would say one thing about traffic. I do know that the city is involved in the Future 42 study, and so that stuff, I believe, is continuing to move forward. And so I do think there will be some of these traffic issues on 42 will be ultimately addressed at some point. So those are some of the reasons I'm in support, and I appreciate everybody's comments this evening.
Thank you, Commissioner Moline. Commissioner Howe.
First of all, I'd like to thank Director Zuccaro. I thought that was a really objective presentation, and I thought you presented a lot of good facts. Also, thanks to the Live Forward, I thought that you guys did a really good job for community outreach and feedback from neighbors, not only commercial but residential. I did hear a lot of the risks, and I commiserate with some of those. The fiscal model for 20 years definitely is concerning, but I think one of the offsetting benefits is that we'll provide a lot more walking traffic to downtown, and I think that will support the retail and restaurants. So although I understand that risk and that concern, I think that there's a counterbalance that we have to address as well. I think the traffic, there's no doubt that this will increase traffic from the current or existing buildings and scenario. I would encourage the city to look comprehensively and globally about the downtown traffic patterns and almost create a downtown traffic plan, much like Commissioner Moline was alluding to, that could mitigate some of these traffic concerns. Because no doubt the city will grow, and we have to think long-term about not only this proposal, but also how we change some of those traffic patterns. I think the benefits of creating residential and affordable housing also outweigh the risks. And so for these reasons, I think that this is a good proposal. I'll be in support of it. I think it's a good move for Louisville to create what is probably a maybe not blighted, but an area or parcel of land that's always struggled to be productive for the city.
Thank you. Commissioner Osterman?
Thanks.
Come back to you. Okay.
Yeah, let's see. So I am also strongly in support of the proposal to rezone. I think that there are a lot of really great reasons that have been put forward tonight for rezoning. First, it meets the policy. I think that it's really clear from the market analysis that there's low demand for commercial in this area. And so if it's not rezoned, then I think that we'll have more of a problem that we already have in Louisville of vacant lots. And so this proposal would address that. Some of the other, I think, really strong factors, not going into all of them, but the fact that this will bring more housing that's really needed in Louisville, especially affordable housing. Folks have talked about how it's supportive of business by bringing more foot traffic, but I'm also thinking of the need for people who work in Louisville to have housing, and knowing that that's also been a factor that has not supported local business. And so I think it's really encouraging to hear from this applicant how serious they are about creating more units that would be affordable. And then finally, I just really wanted to, again, recognize that the applicant has done a great job of community engagement, and so that's really encouraging to see how many neighbors in the area are supportive of this proposal. So,
Thank you. Commissioner Basket.
I will be in support of this rezoning. I think it's a very logical place to have housing in the way the 42 corridor is developing. My understanding of the future 42 work is that it looks at a corridor for all users and not necessarily people blasting through town. So I am not as concerned about adding additional vehicles to the mix because they should be traveling more slowly at this point in time. I'm excited about an affordable rental product. I think we really need that in this town. And my experience with renter neighbors is they're long-term renters and they have an investment in the community and raise their kids there. So I have no issue with that. And lastly, I think this is a great residential bookend on the corridor to Clementine Commons and Sunnyside Place. It creates more of a neighborhood. So I'm in support. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Choi.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to bury the lead and not say whether I'm in support or against at the beginning, and I'll talk through this a little bit. So thank you, Director Zuccaro, for the presentation as well. Thanks to the applicant for putting together a presentation on your own additionally. I think it provided some good information. You know, when I think about new residential development, my first reaction is to that negative fiscal model where I know that the burden that the city bears for additional residential development is greater than additional commercial development. That's a bitter pill, but it's one that frequently municipalities have to take because it's a very difficult chicken and egg scenario. January of 2022, we had a currently vacant commercial property that was a grocery store that had a future tenant coming in who immediately pulled out because we lost 500 homes a month before. And, you know, it would have been a great anchor tenant for that retail area. And unfortunately, they decided that the customer base just wasn't there because all of those homes had been, you know, burned down. And so in a scenario where you're evaluating what the overall fiscal and financial impact to a municipality is, sometimes you have to put the cart in front of the horse and, you know, establish additional residents so that the business model and the pro forma looks right to additional commercial development, even if it's not right there. I am hopeful to some comments that the other commissioners have made. I'm hopeful that the well, and let me make a point of saying, in reviewing this application as simply a rezoning application and not a PUD application right now, I'm hopeful and would encourage any future developer that would come into the space if this were to be approved to hold true to some of the ideals that have been conveyed tonight about focusing on affordability, true affordability, sustainability, and really creating a product that if a future developer is, you know, focused on building, developing, and maintaining a rental stock, that there's a continued investment, you know, to maintain the condition of whatever that rental stock is. So all of those things notwithstanding, I'm in favor. Nobody saw that coming.
Thank you, Commissioner Choi. Commissioner Krantz.
Yeah, I really appreciate the idea that it makes sense to develop the two lots together and to have a unified vision for it. I unfortunately don't see this meeting the code. We need to read from the very beginning of the code that says the first sentence of the section 174450 says that rezoning of land is to be discouraged. And then after that, we can look at the criteria 2, which is what I wanted to look at that more closely. I'm not sure, but there's 2 parts to it. It says it had to have been changed to such a degree that it's in the public interest. So I'm wondering if we can really say that it has been changed so significantly over the past 7 years. It was presented in the packet as if it was being changed from industrial to residential, but I feel like it's being changed from changed from commercial to residential, and that's only over a short period of time. So I'm not sure that I agree that it has been changed to such a significantly, as it states, as needs to meet the criteria of the code. And the second part is that we have to, I don't know if we're making a strong enough case that this is in the public interest. And I want to get back to that because I think that the affordable housing issue might not really hold water to me. But the first part is, let me see, I want to just broaden this out and say, like, it seems to me, based on the way that we're applying this criteria here, and I understand that I'm in the minority among the rest of my commissioners, but I just wanted to ask the question that, would this pretty much allow rezoning of any commercial in Louisville to residential? Because if we have such a weak criteria for how much change has been, if only over the past 7 years, that we know that in most of Louisville, commercial is not thriving. So I think that there's many other areas that are not, where commercial is not thriving, where if we applied this exact same criteria, they could be rezoned as well. I mean, I don't feel like we've made a really robust case for the public interest for this particular spot, because we could say that many other areas in town, it would be, based on the criteria we're applying here, would be in the public interest to rezone from commercial to residential if we're going to say it's just going to add more housing. I appreciate the need for more housing, but I have strong opinions that this isn't necessarily the way to get more affordable housing. So yeah, overall, I don't think that this really meets the strict criteria of what the code is and what is our policy for rezoning. So I don't feel in favor of this, and I would hope that maybe other commissioners would entertain the idea of how we might be, what would happen if we were presented next week with another proposal for a rezoning of a commercial area in town to residential, and another 109 units of residential there. And what would be the fairness, especially given the fact that we've got a comprehensive plan change coming up, and we have a housing study that we're waiting on in the very near future. So I would just love it if we could all consider the idea of waiting on this until the housing study is completed. I believe that's going to be, in a much more final phase before us next month. And I feel like the applicant could still move forward with part of their proposal, with a PUD for the western portion of their lot.
Just to respond to that, the question you pose, no, I don't think it has to be a 20-year time horizon for us to look back and say, yeah, no, commercial's not going to work here. I have more I want to discuss, but just to kind of directly respond to that, welcome other commissioners' thoughts on that as well. So yeah, I do. I appreciate that staff did not run with it was zoned by mistake. It was not a mistake, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But I also don't see that as a big issue. That was just happened to be in the letter that was submitted. So, other thoughts on the Commissioner Kranz's question?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I don't know, I hear what you're saying, Commissioner Kranz. I don't know that it would be, like, housing is one of the larger issues maybe facing our community. We don't have a lot of other opportunities in town. We're not a town that has opportunities for growing into green fields and just adding housing wherever we can. And so I think that looking at other commercial areas that are in a similar state as this particular property, and looking at them for residential is an okay thing. You know, I guess I'm not sure I see a, I guess I would just say that, you know, is that a bad thing? If we did get some more requests from commercially zoned properties, and they wanted us to consider a rezoning to residential, and I think we run them through the process just like we've run this project through, and analyze the pros and cons of that rezoning, and reach a conclusion with those other properties as well.
Yeah,
Additional thoughts regarding that, if anybody want to chime in? I would say, so, going way back, the one, so I do find myself in favor of it at this time, but going way back, looking at the initial DLO proposals, we really were looking for something different, different than what it's morphed into on any number of levels. The thought really was a mixed-use residential and commercial walkable area, and it was also thought that the residential portions would really help support more of that commercial, right? The whole live-work lofts, that was going to be something that didn't exist in the market, that had a nice ring to it at the time. And even if you get down to like the pavement that's on Cannon Street right now, that was all part of this. It was Woonerf, yes, Woonerf, we learned, right? So that was an area where automobiles and pedestrians could coexist, with pedestrians being more safe than they might otherwise be. So part of me is sad in realizing that it really hasn't become all of that. And yet, ultimately, though, I do find it is clear there's a way to make those lights go back on. Yeah, waving somewhere. Yeah, there we go. Thanks. And then also, right, this was at a time, too, when light rail was going to be here in the year 2023. So I am still, I am actually greatly encouraged by this, because I think this actually does help us support that goal of both light rail and perhaps passenger rail coming through here, and that with the additional housing units, that actually is good for the city on that level, that residential density would be help support passenger count for anything that might happen there. So while I am concerned about how it'll look in build out, and we'll discuss that, you know, hopefully perhaps in future discussions, it's clear, I think, to any of us as we look around town, as we look around both the country, the state, and the city, that retail is overbuilt, and the thought that we're going to be getting viable retail anytime soon would be burying our heads in the sand. So that's where I think it only makes sense at this point in time. Initially, when that DLO proposals came in, these properties were not part of that discussion because they were different property owners. And if memory serves me correct, this commission never approved what's currently DLO Plaza. At the time, we were looking at this gateway to our new walkable neighborhood, and then all of a sudden this popped up as a strip mall, for lack of better, well, there are better words, but that was approved by council. So in this case, we got some commercial in DLO Plaza, and we're letting go of it in this area, even though we didn't know exactly what would happen there. So just curious. So yeah, I'm in support of it, but welcome any other thoughts.
Chair, just one comment on that. You know, to your point, we don't know what's going to happen, and I would encourage everyone to remember that this is simply an application for rezoning, not a PUD. And while, the applicant who's really sponsoring this rezoning request has a documented history and a resume of providing, what would be a ostensibly welcome residential development, it is simply a request to say it's commercial, can we rezone it to residential? And fundamentally, just sticking with the basic economics of supply and demand, we have lots of commercially zoned areas within the city that are vacant or underutilized, and we have very few, if any, residentially zoned areas within the city that are maxed out or overutilized. So when it comes down to simple mathematics, it's a question of, do we need more residentially zoned space within the city limits or more commercially zoned space? Today, right now, residential.
I would also speak to the fiscal analysis. Every single house since the community was created has had that impact on our budget, where it costs to support residential. It's a known fact. Many of us wouldn't be able to live here if our houses hadn't been built over time. So to me, that's, while it would be nice if the numbers were different, they can't and won't really ever be. It also speaks to the fact that when we look at our general fund, that we're fortunate in that a lot of our income does come from sales tax and property tax. While I wish it could be a positive number, it just simply can't be ever a positive number, really. So if anybody else has any additional thoughts on that, welcome that discussion too. But Commissioner Krantz.
Yeah, I'll just say one more thing, if it's okay, just for the record and for City Council to consider, because I understand that I'm in a minority here. I really still don't, while I agree that there is a need for residential and that would be much more feasible in this area than commercial, I still don't feel like this meets the wording of the code for rezoning, especially considering the first sentence of the rezoning policy is that rezoning should be discouraged. So I wanted to say I do appreciate that. I also agree that fiscally sometimes residential may cost more, but maybe we would also be able to, maybe this may not apply because you guys disagree on this one, but for future rezoning requests, and I'm sure we're going to get a lot more similar to this, that we would consider putting in more, taking that deficit of I can't remember what it was, $200,000. We could take that deficit from our general fund and we could also apply that in business assistance grants, so that making the commercial, rather than assuming that it's just going to pay for itself, if we're willing to pay that amount for a residential, we could apply that deficit in our analysis, and put that towards commercial to help support maybe smaller spaces and encourage more small businesses to go in. So I just wanted to say that because I felt like the original intent of this area was that we would have a unified, our comprehensive plan says that we would have a unified urban area between our downtown and between this DLO area, the Highway 42 area. It would be one unit and we would have, and the commercial would support downtown, and somebody would be able to walk from one business in downtown, not move their car, and go shopping in the DLO area too. I mean, that's just what it said in our comprehensive plan. So I just wanted to leave it at that. I don't feel like it meets the strict criteria of the code, but I understand what everybody else is saying.
Can I offer just one thought? So if I read that full sentence, Commissioner Krantz, it says, for the purpose of establishing and maintaining sound, stable, and desirable development within the city, and then it says the rezoning of land is to be discouraged, okay? And so I guess I would argue when you look at that site now, when you think about that particular area and how it either does fit or doesn't fit into the surrounding context, I think there could be some people that would say it currently isn't maintaining a sound, stable, and desirable development environment in its current state, and that then therefore carries that area into the reason for why it should be rezoned. So.
I would agree with that. Thank you. Yep. Any additional commissioner thoughts, deliberations? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve Resolution 17, Series 2023, DLO Loss Rezoning 1301 Courtesy Road and Outlot 1.
I will make that motion.
Thank you, Commissioner
Second.
Baskett. Commissioner Howe on the second. Thank you. With a roll call, please.
Commissioner Osterman,
Yes.
Commissioner Howe,
Yes.
Commissioner Moline,
Yes.
Commissioner Baskett,
Yes.
Commissioner Choi,
Yes.
Commissioner Krantz,
No.
Chair Brown Eyes.
Yes. Motion carries. Look forward to hearing more about it in the future. I would suggest we'll take a 5-minute break right now. It's been about an hour. No, it's only been 40 minutes, huh? 35 minutes. Okay, why don't we keep on moving then? I will now open the public hearing on a request for a preliminary plat and preliminary PUD, Resolution 18, Series 2023. The purpose of the hearing is to receive evidence regarding the application materials, provide a public forum for all interested parties who wish to comment on this request before the Planning Commission. The procedure for the public hearing will be as follows. First, there'll be a presentation testimony by city staff, followed by questions from the Planning Commission to staff. Next, we will have a presentation and testimony by the applicant, followed by questions from the Planning Commission to the applicant. After these two presentations, members of the public who have joined this meeting in person, by computer, or telephone may speak regarding the application. Anyone who would like to speak is asked to complete a speaker card, use the raise hand function if participating by computer, or *9 if calling in by telephone. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes per person. Pooling of comments is not permitted. The purpose of public comment is to receive public testimony, not a forum for debate or dialogue. Commenters are encouraged to raise pertinent issues and may ask questions for clarity. However, these questions will not be directly answered during the public comment period. The applicant and staff will then be allowed to make a closing statement. I will then close the public hearing and no further testimony or other evidence will be received unless the commission decides to reopen the hearing. The Planning Commission will discuss the matter and may approve with conditions, deny, or continue it to a future meeting. Public hearings are recorded for the public record. All testimony must be presented after stating your full name and address. Does anyone participating in this hearing object to the procedure I have described? Seeing none. Do we have proper notification?
That's correct, Chair. This item was properly noticed per the municipal code requirements.
Thank you. Do we have any disclosures?
Chairman?
Yes.
As a local business owner, I deal with many local citizens and businesses. A member of this applicant team has one such dealing with me. This will not affect my judgment of this proposal and will not bias my decision-making toward this proposal.
Thank you. Any additional disclosures? Seeing none, we'd welcome the staff presentation, please.
All right, good evening, Commissioners. My name's Ellie Hassan. I'm a planner too with the City of Louisville. And the item before you is Resolution Number 17, Series 2023, which recommends approval of a preliminary subdivision plat and planned unit development at the addresses of 421, 533, and 565 East Street. So for a little bit of
Sorry,
context.
just to interrupt. So
Oh, yeah,
is
of
it
course.
Resolution 18? The agenda says 18.
From my understanding, I think the last item was Resolution 18 and this one was 17. I think that may have been a typo on the agenda.
Okay, typo. Thank you.
All right, so with this item, just for a little bit of background, this site's about 3.6 acres and it spans along 2 existing unplatted properties that are accessed off of East Street, which acts a bit as a frontage road for Highway 42 and Courtesy Road. It's bound by the north by Pine Street Plaza's commercial, which is a commercial area, and on the west there's the BNSF Railroad right-of-way. And over to the south, there are some existing single-family detached and some townhomes a little bit further from that property. And currently, the subject property has about 10 single-family detached units with some accessory structures that were built or relocated to the site, and this happened between the 1900s and 1960s. And regarding those structures, the city's Historic Preservation Commission has already approved the demolition of those structures in July 2023 over the course of 2 different applications. And the first part of this application is a preliminary plat, and in this case, the applicants are proposing to create a subdivision of 36 lots and 8 outlots, which are labeled A through H on the preliminary plat. The lots range from about 1,800 to about 3,700 square feet in size. And the outlots here are established for creation of private roads, private alleyways, parking, common open space, utilities, and drainage easements. And one of the things that is mentioned in this application is there are some modifications to the subdivision requirements that are requested. And the first of these modifications is for a block length of 193 feet between intersections rather than the required 400 feet. And this is measured out in red over here on this slide. And this shows the distance that's proposed between the lengths of access and roadway that are on the site. The other modifications relate to the lot depth and frontage on the lots. So as highlighted in red on lot 17 here, the applicants are requesting a minimum lot width of 19 feet instead of the required 50 feet. And normally there's a required depth to width ratio of 2.5. So basically the depth can't be greater than 2.5 times the width. And instead of that, the application is proposing a 5.2 ratio instead. And this is, again, exhibited by lot 17, which is the greatest ratio proposed on the site. And the modification criteria are discussed further on in this presentation. And one of the things to note, too, is that there is a right-of-way dedication on the part of the parcel. Let me go back real quick. There's a right-of-way dedication over here on East Street as well. And one of the other things to note is that there is a 15% public land dedication required under the municipal code in section 16.16.060. And normally that's done, and it's 15% for residential properties, but the applicant is proposing this as fee in lieu, which is permitted through section B2 of the municipal code in that section, or subsection B2. One thing to note too is that there is a 10-foot sanitary sewer easement for the Louisville Sanitation District, and the city will look at vacating this further on in the final plat process. Moving on to the preliminary PUD that's associated with this project. The PUD, or planned unit development, proposes a mix of 15 single-family detached units, which are shown in yellow on this parcel, on this map, and 21 townhome units, which are shown in blue, and this totals 36 residential units on the site. The single-family homes are located on the south and north edges of the property, while the townhomes are located towards the middle of the site. There is a 26-foot wide private street that goes along here and fronts on East Street that creates a U-shaped access point around the property. There's also an alleyway that goes through some of the alley-loaded townhomes and the detached garages located there. There's a total of 24 parking spaces off-street on the site, as well as additional 2 parking spaces created from an attached or detached garage on each of the dwelling units. There are light fixtures proposed along the site that generally meet the pending dark sky ordinance that's being considered by council at this time. Staff will reevaluate conformance of the light fixtures with the adopted ordinance at final planned unit development. And to go into a little more detail about the proposed units, the single-family detached homes have 2 different models proposed. There's a type 1 and a type 2 design, and the location of those is delineated on this on the key map on the slide. So both models of the detached single-family homes are 2 stories with a below-grade basement. The materials that are seen on both the models are some black trim windows and garages, as well as standing seam metal roofs, and each model has the option of a horizontal steel plank siding. The type 1 model, which is shown at the top and shown in this orange-yellow color on the map, has about a 1,500 square foot footprint, and there are 3 different material palettes proposed that are detailed in the PUD exhibit, but some of the materials worth noting, in addition to the ones mentioned previously, are a wood shingle textured material and also vertical and horizontal plank siding. Type 2, which is the model below in blue, is about a 1,978 square foot footprint, And the materials for this one include cedar, steel plank, and a cementitious or hardy plank siding. And the townhomes in this development in the center of the site are a mix of triplex and quadplex units with an end unit type A design and an interior unit that's a type B design. I do apologize for the typo on here, but these units are type B in the middle and type A on the outside. And the type A units have a relatively simple form with a gable roof, while the type B units on the interior have a flat roof and the massing has a little bit of variation and some recessed portions in order to break up that form. The garages on these units are also simple flat roofs with parapets and are detached from the units. And there's some elevations that are located on the plan, but also I want to include this 3D rendering from the applicants, which does show the garage massing towards the rear of the sites that are alley loaded. And the materials proposed on these townhomes do match those seen in the single-family detached homes and are detailed again in the PUD exhibit provided by the applicants. Both these unit types do require height, both the unit types of townhomes require height waivers, which will be discussed later. Another thing to note on the PUD is the proposed landscaping, and because this property is residential medium density zoned, there aren't any requirements from commercial or industrial design standards and guidelines that has to follow. However, staff did look at the landscaping relative to the PUD requirements as much as we could. The site does provide some shrubs, grasses, perennials, and trees in common areas, and there is some landscaping proposed in the unfenced front yards of the residential units. There's a variety of trees and rock mulch proposed in the private yard spaces, which you can see on these detached units on the north and south portions. And one thing to note too is that the site is surrounded by a 6-foot tall privacy fence. A detail is provided here, and this fence is located along the entire perimeter of the site, and it does also divide up the private yard space between each townhome and single-family detached unit. The site also does propose about a 5,200 square foot common open space area, which is an outlot B highlighted in blue. And this unit abuts onto 12 of the townhomes, which have front yards facing out into the space. The space is also relatively centrally located and has relatively central accessibility for all units on here. Another thing to note is there are 2 rain gardens proposed as part of the detention systems in outlot D and F, which are shown in green and orange respectively on the plans. And again, these will contain drainage detention ponds that have rain gardens and terraced retaining walls. There were some public comments about traffic impacts to the site, and a traffic impact study was submitted for the preliminary development. And according to the impact, the 2025 traffic conditions in the table show that at full expected build-out, the intersections near the development will maintain a level service of C or better. Overall, the report found that the proposed units will have minimal impact to the nearby intersections, and a copy of the full report is provided in the attachments for reference. And moving on to the inclusionary housing and other waivers that are requested on this site, the applicants are proposing the fee in lieu option to satisfy the inclusionary housing requirements in the municipal code. City Council approval is required for this option, and it will be further evaluated at their public hearing. The applicant does request some zoning waivers from the residential medium density zoning requirements, and they are shown on this table on the site. It is worth noting too that these values are requested, the values that are shown in the requested value are the most intensive and restrictive values, and not every lot has that extent of request on there. However, it is also worth noting that all lots do require waivers from the minimum lot area, the maximum lot coverage, front setback, and side interior setback requirements. There are certain lots that do meet the rear and setback height requirements, and that's mainly with the units that are on the south and north portion of the site. And one thing, and then over here I have an exhibit that shows the height waiver that's at the most extreme end of the site, which is about 39 feet. So this is, again, shown on some of the townhome units on the edges of the property. And the height mainly is to allow for a gabled roof style, which has been seen by staff to be consistent with Clementine Commons, which elevations are shown below here. And also, the gabled roof form is seen on Sunnyside Place. However, that development is much shorter than this one. The taller units that are proposed at roughly 39 feet or less are towards the center of the site, and staff finds that this does reduce impacts to surrounding developments by concentrating them in the center rather than the outside of the site. And based on these factors, staff do support the height waiver that's proposed by the applicants. And going into the subdivision modification criteria, in granting these modification criteria, there are five criteria that have to be met in the municipal code. And for the subdivision modifications, staff found that the modifications result in a development with similar street patterns to the nearby residential developments found on East Street, such as Clementine Commons and Sunnyside Place. The reduced distance between street intersections allows for greater site circulation because it creates a private drive that loops through the site and matches the existing character of the surrounding area by providing a smaller intersection distance. The modifications also help provide a greater variety and choice of housing because the lot shapes help provide a mix of housing types that would otherwise not be possible at the proposed density. For example, if the site were to conform with standard subdivision practices for RM zoning, larger lots would likely need a cul-de-sac or similar turnaround design, which would give fewer lot options and less density than is currently proposed on this development. The lot design also allows for functional open space and private yards by allowing for residents to have smaller lots, which allows for greater common space area. The intersection distance reduction is needed to create site circulation, as previously mentioned. Alternatives to this design would result in a single entry drive potentially for the site, which would create greater congestion by providing one way in and out and severely limit the site layout. The narrow deep lots are also necessary to provide the proposed residential units. The modification results in 36 dwelling units, which is less than the maximum 37 allowed with the net area of the site in the RM zone district. So by allowing these subdivision modifications, it's not increasing the density that's allowed per the code. And because of these findings, staff finds that the modification criteria for the preliminary plat are satisfied. Staff also finds that the preliminary plat with the approved modifications is in conformance with Title 16. Staff also supports the fee in lieu option for the public land development, for the public land dedication, because each residential lot contains a private yard space and Outlot B functions as a common open space area for residents. The site also has several park areas and trails within a 1 mile distance and is within a quarter mile of downtown Louisville, which provides walkable amenities for residents. The preliminary plat also supports the comprehensive plan by supporting an urban neighborhood configuration, which has smaller parcels and some lots that have street orientation. Regarding the preliminary PUD, staff finds that it's in conformance with section 17.28 and with waivers from certain RM zoning requirements. The subject property has an urban and neighborhood designation in the comprehensive plan as well and is consistent with characteristics in these sections. The proposal is consistent with policies in the comprehensive plan's neighborhood and housing framework as well, specifically principles NH4 and NH5. Based on this information, staff recommends approval of Resolution 17, Series 2023, which recommends approval of a preliminary subdivision plat and preliminary planned unit development for 15 single-family and 21 townhome units on a 3.6 acre parcel. Staff did receive some additional public comments for this item after the packet was published, which are before you on the dais. There is also a copy for members of the audience on the bulletin board to my right, on the back of the council chambers. And that does conclude staff presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions, and I believe the applicant also has a presentation afterwards.
Thank you. We'll open up for questions. Commissioner, questions of staff. Commissioner Osterman.
Thanks for the presentation. I just have a question about the land dedication, and I was a little confused because when you were showing the diagram, Outlot B has some open space. Does that count towards any land dedication, or is that something, would that be different?
So the outlawed B space is what the code considers to be common open space, which is different in definition from what's expected for the public land dedication. And Director Zuccaro can clarify if there's anything I'm
Yeah,
missing from
the
that.
public land dedication is for public land, so it would have to be deeded to the city to qualify. This would be I mean, it could have a public easement, I'm not sure, but it's a private amenity basically for the residents there, and it's not a public park per se.
Land that's given to the city that the city then has to pay to maintain?
Right. Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Commissioner Basket.
I have a question for staff about East Street. So I took a quick ride over there this afternoon and noted that there is, I think, a 3-foot sidewalk on one side of the street. And as we all know, it's a pretty funky little frontage road that's out there. So my question to staff is, I noted in the traffic study that they referred to a multi-use path, and I wondered what the status of improvements to East Street might be if they are considered.
I think I would have to get back to you on that. I'm not sure what the status of those improvements would be along here at this stage.
So I would add a couple things. Is I think the city's had an intent to improve the sidewalk along there, so that started with Clementine, where we did get additional right-of-way and tried to have a nicer sidewalk, so we're trying to build those segments. Highway 42 plan is also contemplating a multi-use path. That alignment's still being considered, so they're, at least in my opinion, I think having a neighborhood sidewalk on East Street and a multi-use path wouldn't necessarily be redundant, and so I do think that the city is intending, as properties redeveloped, to improve the sidewalk on East Street so that those residents have an easier way to get into downtown.
So this includes how many feet of sidewalk?
The linear feet along East Street is about 400 feet on this property.
How about width?
With the width, I believe it would be our standard 5 feet, but I'd have to double check on that.
Thanks.
That really helps with my question. So I will wait on the multi-use path thing, but if we're making sidewalk improvements as part of this, that's really significant. And I understand the sort of filling the gaps in the teeth from Clementine Commons all the way up to make a continuous sidewalk there. Thank you.
And I should add as well to that, Commissioner, I think one of the reasons for the land dedication that the applicants are providing for East Street is to help accommodate those, if I understand correctly.
Roy.
Planner Hassan, thanks for the presentation. A question for you. In reviewing the application and working with the applicant, did the city evaluate any either desire or need to provide updates or modifications to the intersection at Pine and East Street? That can be a pretty gruesome interchange depending on the time of day with just its current use. So did the city look at any impacts from this development to what that intersection would need?
We did receive some public comment that also had similar concerns on that. I believe the traffic study was there was part of the traffic analysis that did look at the Pine Street, East Street intersection. It found there to be a service B, but didn't look necessarily at safety improvements or suggestions to that intersection.
Thank you.
Additional questions for staff? Commissioner Krantz.
Yeah, I've got 2 questions. The first one's a pretty easy one. For the fence, is that going to be a fence that's going to prevent any pedestrians from going over the railroad track?
It will be a 6-foot-tall fence, so there will be a bit of a physical barrier over to prevent crossings from to the railroad track.
And okay, and then my second question was with regard to the modification criteria. The modification criteria, does that need to apply to all the waivers, or only the waiver for the distance, the road distance, the distance between intersections?
So the criteria would apply for all the modifications requested in the table on this slide. So it would be for the lot depth as well as the lot frontage.
Okay, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. I got one more, a really quick one, though. Could you just give me a quick refresher on the difference in how we're now analyzing a preliminary PUD from a final PUD, just to make sure I'm understanding it correctly?
When I evaluated the criteria for it, it looked like it was the same criteria as the final PUD, at least for that portion of the plan.
So we will be seeing a final PUD is going to come before us later.
That's correct, and it will be evaluated by the same criteria.
Thank you.
Can I ask you to bring up the modification slide? And then do other people have questions? Sorry, no.
The waivers, or?
Well, this is the starting point for it, yeah. Yeah, let's leave that up. Other questions from the commission?
The modification criteria number 3, it says allows for functional open space and private yards. Is that private open space or public open space?
That was a mistake on my abbreviation there. It was for common open space.
And so if it doesn't have common open space, I guess that's the fee in lieu. Help me understand.
No, that's two separate things.
Two separate things.
Yeah, if you can speak to that.
Yeah, I apologize for the confusion. So this was referring to so in the code, there is a common open space definition, which refers to basically amenities for the residents who will live there. So in this case, Outlot B is intended mainly to be a common shared open space that staff anticipate to be maintained by an HOA rather than the city.
So just to clarify, and I can bring this up with the ClickShare here, it might be helpful. So there's for modification reviews, there's 6 criteria. There's only 5 up here because one is that there's no additional dwelling units. But there isn't a requirement for open space, is the
We just
point.
lost all of
Oh, yeah, I was.
feed.
Oh, yeah, I was switching to the ClickShare.
Not sure what the public is seeing either at this point.
Yeah, can you just go ahead and just put it back on
Okay.
yours, because it'll take me a while. It was just only if you wanted to see all of them, but I would just reference you to 162430. It is not a criteria, I don't believe, to have, I think what Planner Hassan was saying is there isn't a requirement to have open space as part of the waivers or
There
the
is
modifications.
not a requirement?
There is not a requirement.
This,
So there's here, let me slow down a little bit. So there's zoning waivers. There's zoning waivers, and then there's subdivision modifications. And so for subdivision modifications, there's a list of criteria, and there's 5 of them that are applicable. And I'm going to bring it up here in a minute, and we can go through them just to clarify that.
in the meantime, I would allow that I'm a little bit hung up on this number 3 as well. 5,200 square feet in Outlot B strikes me as barely functional and really more front yards for the people who live immediately adjacent to that, and that it doesn't work potentially well for all of the other units. So if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, and let's bring up the criteria for the zoning waivers as well, because I think that's probably what you're referring to, and they really all work together. You're going to have to find that all of the waiver criteria are met. So, okay, do you want to
Yeah.
bring up the ClickShare?
There we go.
Okay, so here are the criteria for the subdivision modifications. So that was that there was the specific table about the driveways and the lot width and some other things. So I think what we're looking at here is that, under this zoning, you could do an apartment building, you can do a more traditional suburban cul-de-sac. The point of the PUD is to do more modern is to implement more modern progressive planning practices. It talks about that in the statement of a PUD. So what we're often looking for in PUDs is we expect waivers, because if you just meet the base code, you don't really need to do a PUD. You can just plat and develop. So for the PUD, we're looking at waivers, we're looking at doing more unique traditional things. So so there's certain things within the subdivision code, and these are the criteria here.
And can I just ask, can I further the question there? Chairman Brown Eyes?
Oh, please, yes.
Are you
Yeah.
in a train of
Yeah.
questioning, or can I interrupt? So I wonder, is number one criteria there is that there are unique physical circumstances and conditions such as irregularity, et cetera, of the property. Are there irregularities of this property? Or exceptional topographical conditions or other physical conditions particular to the affected property?
So I think that'll be, I think from staff's analysis, there are, can you bring up the table? I'm going to switch out on this and we can kind of go over that. So I think this is a more urban, so if we talk about the block lengths, this is a more urbanized area. We have similar developments up and down East Street, including Clementine to the south and Sunnyside. And this is kind of following that pattern. So this lot is relatively narrow. So if you had a really big property, you could easily meet that block length, I think. But because this is kind of, between, it's between Pine Street and the other developments, there's really not a lot of room. You'd really have to put that one cul-de-sac in there, which doesn't meet some of the other cities' policies. So I think there is a unique narrowness to this lot compared to the base zoning. Can you go back to the table, please? So I think when you're trying to get this type of townhome development, I think there are some other constraints because this property isn't as big as like a typical suburban neighborhood where you could fit the standards in. And so I think that applies to the front lot line as well. I think to meet these standards, your option is to, you could just develop this as a condoized development, and they could sell the airspace basically and have common property and have the exact same development as well. So we take that into consideration. I think having the fee simple, this allows them to create fee simple lots, which then they can sell with the property, even though there's still common space. So it's, we took that into consideration. It's not specifically speaking to any of the criteria, but it is in a kind of the urban core, near the urban core of the city. There's not a lot of room to work with compared to a typical suburban neighborhood.
Okay, thank you.
I guess one of my concerns is that this is one giant cul-de-sac, and that given these unit sizes of like 3,825 square feet, 3,366 square feet, that what we're trying to do with the single-family homes is push not necessarily a modern approach, rather a kind of outdated suburban approach to squeezing as much in there as possible. I've often been a proponent of density for any number of good reasons, I think, and I'm wondering whether kind of how you envision this as being a modern approach to well-done density. And we can let the applicant speak to that as well.
I'd maybe defer to the applicant. I mean, I think from the staff standpoint, we didn't really look at it with that lens necessarily, but I understand the question, and I think that could be a good discussion with the applicant. I think I think when we looked at it, what we liked is there's a mix of types, which also meets some of our, I think, comprehensive plan policies having a mix of housing types. I understand it's not hugely diverse, and there's really big houses in there still. So I recognize that.
Yeah, we can discuss that further. Great, thanks.
And then I don't know if you want to see, I think to your question about common open space, I just want to bring up the waiver criteria really quick. I'm going to switch to the click share here once I get to that section.
Thanks.
I can keep it on this laptop for now.
Sorry, I always have trouble finding this. It's labeled oddly in the code. Let me see if I can find it. Here we go. Okay. It's labeled oddly because it doesn't say it's the waiver section. It says it's the underlying district regulations and development design standards and guidelines shall apply. But basically down here where it starts, however, so this is where we really get into our waiver criteria and what staff, so there's kind of two choices, and what staff analyzed it against was the end here. So that the modification or waiver is warranted by the design and amenities incorporated into the development plan, and the needs of the residents for usable or functional open space and buffer areas can be met. So I think, Chair Brauneis, that's what you were referring to.
Yeah.
So I think, I think if they do have some open space, so I think there's a question of, is it usable and functional? Does it provide the needs for the residents in the neighborhood? So I think that's what the deliberation needs to be.
Great, thanks. Actually, I had that quote that I was going to read at some point this evening to discuss that further. So any additional questions for staff at this time from commissioners? Commissioner Krantz?
Was there any discussion with, about the routes for kids to take to school from this neighborhood?
From what we analyzed, let me see if I can bring up the overall PUD. So it did look like there are sidewalks that are adjacent to the private drive here that do connect up with the eventual East Street sidewalk improvements, which would help provide routes for not just students, but just all users of the site.
Is the Clementine development currently serviced by a school bus?
I'd have to check with BVSD to see the bus routes through this area.
Okay, I was just wondering. Thank you.
I have a quick, Commissioner Howe.
Hey, I believe there's, just to build on Commissioner Krantz's discussion points, I believe there's a trail, Crusher Fine Trail, that runs north-south on the west side of Highway 42. Does this incorporate that into it by chance?
Let me see if I can pull up the aerial to see where it is relative to it.
I think it's consistent with the Clementine.
Down there.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was built with Clementine,
Yeah.
and then it crosses over onto the west side of East Street, and then the idea is you connect with the sidewalk on moving up. Again, with the Highway 42 plan, we are looking at maybe some options to have more of that type of trail also in the vicinity.
So that goes around this lot. That's not part of this.
Yeah, it's
That's south of this lot,
Okay.
that new trail. Yeah.
Additional questions for staff at this time? Seeing none, we will take a break, after which we'll invite the applicant up. How about until 9:05, we'll reconvene.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
Great, thanks. If we can reconvene now. Just due to the fact that it is getting a little bit late, 9:05, we'd like to ask you to make your presentation this evening, and then we may be looking at continuance soon thereafter. So we'll certainly open it up to your presentation. We would all like to hear that. And we may request that you kind of give us highlights when we reconvene next month, if that's how this goes. So just to give you a warning. Thank you very much. If you could start, well, you know the drill. Name, city of residence.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, commissioners. My name's Andy Johnson. I'm with DAJ Design at 922A Main Street. I'm also a Louisville resident at 920 Lincoln Avenue. I understand we are under some time constraints, so however, the project requires a presentation, and we'll take that time as it's needed with the understanding of what you just said. Okay, so tonight, as we discussed earlier, we are considering a preliminary plat MPUD. Because of the municipal code and what was discussed previously, it is required for this application or for this project type. So currently, our historic building demo application is approved. We are talking about the prelim, and then our next steps will be a final application, and we are hoping to move into that. You will notice that the development of plans are further along than a typical preliminary application. And we can talk about this project as a final application to the point where civil engineering was done with a final drainage report included. So we can have a little bit more detailed discussion than a typical prelim. So let's look at where this is in the context of Louisville. So the site is located here. With downtown surrounding two sides of it, primarily one side, but the point is that it's in very close proximity to downtown, with Highway 42 and 95th shown with the orange dashed line. When we put that in the context of the street structure and the blocks, you can see where that falls with a little bit more detail. The zoning map shows the site right nestled into right nestled into what is that downtown core. That's our CC zoning district. We are primarily and within, predominantly within the RM zoning district, and that's indicated with the yellow highlighted area. Downtown, as you guys know, has been primarily comprised of two zoning districts for a very, very long time. And as you know, Old Town existed for nearly 90 years without a lot of change up until really the early mid-70s. The two zoning districts being RM and RL. RL being single family, larger lot sizes, only one house. RM having that gradient of density getting closer to the downtown core, so allowing a few more dwelling units per square foot. So the difference between the two being 1 unit per 7,000 square feet in the RL, 1 unit per 3,500 in the RM. So again, a gradient of density as it gets to more of that core downtown area. As we look at an enlarged area, the site being located here, it is bordered, as we mentioned, right along Highway 42, East Street being kind of like a frontage road to Highway 42, bordered on the west by the railroad. I will address a few of the questions as we go through this in terms of access and some of the discussions around the structure of the development. But I think the main thing with this illustration is that this site is not necessarily within the downtown core. However, it is directly adjacent and for all practical purposes, very much a part of it. And probably for all the developments that have occurred, the closest and most integrated part for this strip along East Street. I know some of you were on commission when the Clementine project was discussed. The area that I just highlighted south of the East Street Village site is both Sunnyside, which was developed in the early 2000s, I believe, and then the Clementine project. Both of them are within the RM zoning district. Clementine being probably the most closely related to East Street Village in terms of character, size, and the requests being that are coming before you. Looking at existing conditions, so this is two different sites that are being combined into one. There are some historic easements. Most of those have been cleared up. All of them will be discussed in the final plat. The sewer easement is probably the one that will require the most instruments to vacate, but it is for a sewer easement that was to access the homes that are on the site. As mentioned before, there are numerous homes on this site. It was not necessarily planned to be that way. A lot of these homes, if you read the historic report, were moved to this site under different circumstances, modified 40s, 50s, wrapped in asbestos, of course, and have remained there as dwelling units, largely rentals for decades. The west site has remained mostly undeveloped. There is a house that is on it. It's called the Ghost House, but that is the only dwelling unit within that area. This has been largely under a family's ownership for a very long time. Mr. Lombardi was one of the longer-term family members. He lives directly to the south, and we've had lots of great discussions with him over the course of this project. I will note that we are 18 months into this project. That is a long time. And within that time frame, we have had a lot of very good, productive, and clarifying conversations with staff. I think staff has done an amazing job through all the iterations of who we've engaged with in staff, of helping along with the project and also being able to talk about this within the context of Louisville and also our municipal code. So the project scope, it's similar in size and a little bit in nature to Clementine. However, it is a little bit uniquely different. Clementine is entirely a townhouse project. What is being proposed with East Street Village that really makes it different in nature is that it's providing a blend of housing types, all under single, all single ownership units. So it's a blend of single-family detached units, as well as townhouses, and then having varying degrees of floor plans within each. The architecture is highly articulated along the borders as it meets its neighbor to the north, as it meets its neighbor to the south, allowing a little bit of a breakdown of the architecture as opposed to townhouses bordering the edges and more or less forming a wall. An illustration of this would look like this, where a skyline is highly articulated with a lot of airspace between buildings and the rooftops providing kind of a jagged edge rather than just a straight wall of building all the way across. The perspective below that gives just a little bit of an illustration of how that property line would look. Talking about the comprehensive plan, that's how we discuss how projects sort of fit into the character of Louisville. So this project does consist of smaller blocks, smaller parcels. lots with street orientation, whether it's East Street or the streets that are being created within the neighborhood itself. It is walkable distance downtown. That's fairly plain. The developments along Highway 42, of which I know are still kind of in planning, have been reviewed by us. It gets a little vague as you go south of Pine Street. However, as staff has mentioned, there are improvements for better connectivity, not just vehicular, but more importantly, foot and bike access to downtown, to the northern lots that we talked about in the previous agenda item this evening. And then, importantly, this is going to provide more rooftops and support of businesses for downtown. It is very important to note, though, this is a small project. This is not a 300-unit or a 150-unit. This is only a 36-unit development. That is relatively small in the development world for housing. It is significant for Louisville in that we don't have a lot of opportunities to create new housing, as we have discussed previously this evening. Traffic is, of course, always a discussion point. So we did bring on board Joe Henderson, who's a licensed traffic engineer in Colorado. Joe has decades of experience of working in Louisville. He has both done private work for developments and also has worked directly with the city. So he's very familiar with our city infrastructure, and he did do a very good job of looking at all of the intersections that are indicated on his diagram, both on the south and also on the north, particularly at Pine Street. The ultimate conclusion was that this development has a minimal impact on the area that he studied. Keep in mind, this is not just for today. This is an outlook all the way to 2045. So it is important that it has kind of a further outlook than just the current conditions. This is a dynamic presentation. I'm not the only one who will be speaking. The team is comprised of TCS Capital Partners, and Jesse Truman will come up, introduce himself towards the end of the presentation. The architect on the project is not me tonight. This is Design Practice, and I'll ask Paul Norquist to come on up and introduce himself and continue the presentation after I'm done. The civil engineer is Sanitas Group. The landscape architect is Outside LA. Both Sanitas and Outside have done numerous projects throughout Louisville. Some of the more notable ones that have been before you recently would be the Clementine project, the climbing gym along with the restaurant next door, and then also Clementine. And then I act as a consultant for the project, helping the design team kind of coordinate all the efforts and make sure that we're going through the process as smoothly as possible. I will probably come up and interject at times, but for now, I think what I'd like to do is bring up Paul as in discussion for the plat and PUD and some of the specifics.
Thank you, Andy. My name is Paul Norquist. I'm with Design Practice. We are out of Denver at 2842 West 44th Avenue. I'm going to run through the first part of this fairly quickly because Ellie and Andy have covered it fairly extensively, but and you just have, which am I, just paging down to get to the next page? Okay, thank you. This is just diagramming the two separate lots that are being combined in the preliminary plat, and Andy has talked about the easements that were required to be vacated, or are being required to be vacated, and mainly the sewer easement, which is I think the last and final piece of the puzzle, which will be taken care of at final. Ellie talked about our block length, lot depth, and lot frontage. We can discuss that a little bit further. I know you guys had some questions on that, but These are the same slides that Ellie talked about and the modifications that were just necessitated by the housing type that's being proposed. When we look at the PUD, this is an overall of the proposed site with north being to the right, adjacent to Pine Street Plaza, and the upper part of the screen there being the railroad right-of-way. There is proposed sidewalk along the front of East Street. There will be that 10-foot dedication to the city with a 5-foot sidewalk that will be constructed as part of the construction. Again, as Andy discussed, the idea here was to provide a variety of housing type. It is in a dense environment, but it's not beyond what the density that is allowed by the RM zoning. We'll get into a little more specifics of the individual housing types here shortly. These are the remaining waiver requests that Ellie had gone through, setbacks, lot coverage, et cetera. I think those have been covered pretty extensively. This is just an idea of what could be built under the RM zoning. So this would meet the various requirements of lot coverage, setbacks, lot widths, et cetera. So what we're trying to do is provide an alternative to this type of layout. We just don't feel it's appropriate for the location. So on the site to the north and to the south has been discussed is where the single-family homes will sit. It provides a little more porous opening to our neighbors to the north and the south. There is a city-owned ditch segment that's between us and Pine Street Plaza, and then the units to the south pull a little farther from the lot line. So again, as Andy discussed, that's the north elevation, the articulation along the facade, just to keep that mass wall of what a townhome development would do from the adjacent neighbors. And that would be the max height line. Again, in rendering view, the north and the south elevator, north side, sorry, actually excuse us, but that should be the south side elevation. So when we discussed the individual homes, and I know there was concern about the size, they are actually relatively modest in size compared to kind of today's development. This is a 1,500 square foot, or sorry, I should say today's infill development that we're somewhat familiar with in subdivision development. This is a 1,500 square foot footprint, including the 2-car garage. It is 2,457 square feet above grade. And then there's the remaining square feet is in the basement itself. I think most of what we're seeing anyway in our work is those homes, the infill development we've seen is somewhere in that 4,500 square foot range. So for us, this is relatively small. There are 14 of these units, this particular unit type, in 3 different material palettes. They consist of, an entryway, ground floor living, powder room. Upstairs is 3-bedroom, 2-bath, and then potential for an additional bedroom and bathroom in the basement. The secondary single-family type, this is a larger footprint. The desire here was to be able to provide a main floor primary suite. So that a little aging in place type living. There's 4 of these on the site. So they have the main living functions as well as a full primary suite on the main level and the garage. The upstairs are much smaller. They're 2-bedroom, 2-bath. They only take up about, maybe a little over 1/3 of the footprint. And then the basement would be under the living area. And at this time, those would be proposed to be unfinished basements to allow the homeowner to decide what they're going to use them for. We'd probably rough in the plumbing for a future bath, but at this point, those would be unfinished. As Andy mentioned, and the townhomes occupy the center of the site, so the density on the project is concentrated to the middle of the site. There's a mix of quadplex and triplex units to break the massings up a little bit. It also allows us to run some of our utilities between the buildings. Each building then has 2 Type A end units and then a Type B central unit. I think the important thing to note on these, in this townhome type that we're proposing, is that the garages are detached from the townhomes. Most of the townhomes we're seeing today are tuck-under garage townhomes. The idea here was to be able to provide each homeowner, whether you're a single-family homeowner or a townhome homeowner, your own private space that you can use as you see fit. So each of these townhomes has its own small backyard. It's not feasible in a tuck-under townhome scenario because it's taken up by your driveway and your parking space. So it also allows for these units to have basement space. And as we get into the plans here, these basements, which are on the bottom right here, the Type A units will actually have an exterior entrance to the basement. The idea being here that if you have a child home from college or perhaps an au pair or something of that sort that is part of the family unit but is not necessary, but wants to be able to kind of come and go as they please, they could have that option. Again, the end units then are 3 bedrooms above grade. Main levels are your typical kitchen, living, dining areas. And then the end units, there is some enclosed space on the roof level. And then the Type B units is just a stair access, and then they have the roof deck. This is just a little rendering of the overall view from the southeast of the site. As far as parking is concerned, I believe this was mentioned by Ellie, but we do have 10 exterior head-in parking spaces, 14 parallel parking spaces on the site. So those 24 spaces are in addition to the 2-car garages that are part of each unit. There was a little discussion on common space and drainage. And just to clarify, this is not public outdoor space, this is common space. As highlighted in yellow, the main common space being that the walkway between the townhome units. We understand that it's not a park. It was a trade-off from the townhome type and being able to detach the garages. In order to get a larger space, those garages would have to be tuck under. It totally changes the style of the unit, and it wasn't something we felt was right for this site at this time. The site has definitely some drainage challenges as well. So the proposed drainage runs all of our drainage to our private drive aisles and then into the detention ponds on the east of the site. That drainage then actually pulls north and ties into city drainage, which runs through that common area ditch zone to the north between us and Pine Street Plaza. Just to touch on the existing vegetation, forestry was out at the site, and it is predominantly trash tree species or volunteer tree species, and there has been no recommendation to save any of the existing trees on the site, so we have been given the okay to clear the site. With that, I'm going to bring up Jesse Truman real quick from TCS Capital Partners, and he's just going to give you a little spiel from the ownership side. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioners, which is the down? Oh, there we go. All right. My name's Jesse Truman, and I'm with the ownership group representing TSC Capital Partners. I forgot to mention I live on Paradise Lane, so Louisville is my home. My kids go to Monarch, and I do. This is a project that's very important to me. I've been in developing real estate. I've been in real estate for 20 years, developing for the last 12. We have projects going in Denver and in Boulder. We have one in Winter Park, but I've always wanted to do something in my hometown, so this is a very important project to me. I guess I just wanted to touch on a few things. The fee in lieu, again, I just wanted to point out the fee in lieu of land dedication was determined with the Public Works Department that it's just not even desirable because the site is so small, there's not much we can do. So it just was determined that we'll pay the fee in lieu and there'll be more money available to support the city and other items like open space. Oh, there we go. I don't do many of these presentations, so sorry. On to the fee in lieu of inclusionary housing. So for this particular project, if we were to do the inclusionary housing, we would be required to do 5 units. With what we were trying to do with a for sale product, with homes like this, it would literally, it's not economically feasible. It's not even an option for us on this. So, you know, it's one of those things, if we were building 300 apartments, it would be easy to comply with. But when we're doing a smaller project, the fee in lieu is really the only option for us. Sustainability. All of these buildings will meet or exceed the adopted 2021 International Energy Conservation Code. We have the homes arranged in the east-west layout, facilitating south-facing roof surfaces to facilitate on-site renewable energy. We still have not determined, you know, whether we will have solar panels included as part of the finished product. You know, we haven't got down that far, but there is a good chance that a lot of these will have solar panels on them. The townhome roofs are pitched to laid out with the south-facing surfaces to facilitate that as well. And then also like to point out that this site has employed electrification. So we have eliminated the use of fossil fuels. So there is no gas being used on any of these homes. It will be all electric. And do you want to speak on the last point, or?
Okay, thank you, Jesse. So in closing, realizing what time it is, I do want to just bring up just a few kind of summary points. Again, RM zoning district. This is an old zoning district. It is a little bit outdated. That's for another discussion. But it is the zoning district that we have to work with. We are not asking for a zoning density waiver. Something that I did fail to mention at the beginning, we did do a number of neighborhood meetings with the neighbors to the north, to the south, and also to the west. And those included the Pine Street Plaza owner, Mr. Caranci, who runs his bike shop right along Front Street. Also, one of the residents, and actually one of the only residences across the tracks that is directly across from this development. And then the neighbors on the corner directly to the south, as well as Mr. Lombardi, who lives approximately right here. We did do kind of a meet and greet and a presentation at my office. We had a number of follow-up emails with a couple of those people who attended and have been accessible and continue to be accessible for any questions or concerns as they've come up. The Pine Street Plaza neighbor, including the American Legion, has expressed concerns around the proximity of buildings to those businesses. However, it is important to note that we do have a 10-foot buffer of city-owned land that the Pine Street Plaza then starts. So there is an additional buffer that is sometimes not always included in the understanding of the project. It is important to note that by definition, this actually is not a cul-de-sac where a road would terminate without other access points. This is a loop. So this does go in a U. It is also important to understand and not often discussed that the required right-of-ways by the city are large. We have discrete right-of-ways for all the utilities. We do not get to share trenches. It increases our easements and makes the requirements on those access ways much larger than what we see in some other areas around the Front Range. So important to note, this project is compatible with Clementine, particularly when you look at the waiver tables between the two projects. They look very close to each other in terms of the numbers, the types of waivers, and in fact, all the waivers literally match up to what Clementine was requesting and was granted. Something that I don't want to have glossed over. What is unique about this is that the space that is open in terms of the green area, as we indicated, those are individual yard spaces. So these are not multifamily apartments. These are not townhouses that just spill out into one common area. Each unit has its own discrete yard area. That is unique in terms of a product like this and does differentiate itself from Clementine. Just a commentary and note on inclusionary housing. It is extremely difficult for a developer, for a project of this size, to have the needs of inclusionary housing or the requirements of inclusionary housing to fall entirely on their shoulders. There is a very meaningful component with the fee in lieu. I know that the city is still working out the details of how that's going to be implemented, but the net result, as it has been proven in the city of Boulder, is that the net result is more inclusionary housing as opposed to the fewer units that would be included on site. And that requires further discussion outside of this PUD application, but it is important to keep in mind. And then in terms of sustainability, what was described in terms of the on-site renewable energy, it hasn't been studied from a modeling perspective. However, with electrification, there will likely be a need for on-site renewables. It just hasn't been determined yet. So with that, I will officially open that up to questions if we have time, or we continue and then we do a brief summary with questions.
Thank you. Yeah, I would suggest to the commission that we might want to continue, come back with a brief summary from the applicant, and then we would then have our commissioner questions of the applicant, and then be able to move into public comment after that, if the commission feels that's appropriate at this time. All right. With that, I would request a motion to continue to October 12th. Can I get a motion?
Yes. Yes, you can get a motion. A motion to continue this hearing on this item until October 12th.
In a second.
A second.
Thank you. All in favor? Actually, I think we need to do a roll call on this one.
Commissioner Osterman,
Yes.
Commissioner Howe,
Yes.
Commissioner Moline,
Yes.
Commissioner Basket,
Yes.
Commissioner Troy,
Yes.
Commissioner Krantz,
Yes.
Chair Brown Eyes.
Yes. Look forward to seeing you all again. Thank you. With that, then, we'll move into any Planning Commission comments. Seeing none, open it for staff comments.
No additional comments this evening.
Thank you. And it looks like we do have a few things that may be on the October agenda.
Yeah, my computer died, if you want to.
It says housing plan update,
Yep.
a presentation of the final housing needs assessment, and the draft strategy matrix.
Yes, that is, I believe, on schedule for October to come back and have that presented to the commission.
Great. All right, with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Second, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. Thank you all.